I didn't get revenge. I just pulled back the curtain.
I should have known it was going to be a wild sort of night when Jasmine cooked dinner herself. In our 12 years of marriage, my wife had touched the stove maybe 6 times, and 3 of those were accidents. But there she was, standing over a perfectly plated salmon with some kind of fancy sauce, wearing that little black dress she saved for client meetings with wealthy buyers. "Will, honey, sit down," she purred, gesturing to the dining room table she'd actually set with our wedding china, the good stuff we only used when her mother visited. "I'm Will Grant, 41 years old, and I've made a living reading people through their design choices. 12 years as a creative director at Tampa's biggest ad agency taught me that when someone puts extra effort into presentation, they're usually selling something you don't want to buy. Now, as a freelance graphic designer working from our Coral Key condo, I had even more time to observe my wife's increasingly theatrical behavior. "This looks incredible, Jazz," I said, settling into my chair. Our golden retriever, Gus, patted over and rested his head on my knee, sensing the tension that seemed to follow Jasmine around these days like expensive perfume. She'd been different lately. New perfume, actually. Something musky and expensive that replaced the light floral scent she'd worn since college. Late-night phone calls she took on the balcony. Mysterious errands that kept her out until midnight. And that cherry-red Mustang I kept seeing parked 2 blocks away whenever I walked Gus. "I have something important to tell you," Jasmine said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. Her manicured nails, when had she started getting them done, caught the candlelight. "Go ahead." She took a delicate bite, chewed thoughtfully, then set down her fork. "I'm getting my tubes untied." I nearly choked on my wine. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. I want to have children, Will. I want to be a mother." Her green eyes, the ones that had made me fall for her at a college party 20 years ago, held steady on mine. "Pete thinks it's a wonderful idea." And there it was, Pete. The name that had been floating around the edges of our conversations for months, always in the context of "this amazing property developer I'm working with," or "Pete says the market's going to explode next year." Peter Lomax was 44, drove that cherry-red Mustang, and had the kind of Miami tan that screamed either skin cancer or spray booth. He'd blown into Coral Key 6 months ago with big talk about luxury developments and bigger talk about his success with women. Jasmine had been assigned as his realtor for a waterfront property that was still, mysteriously, in negotiations. "Pete thinks it's a wonderful idea," I repeated slowly. "And what does Pete have to do with your reproductive choices?" Jasmine's smile was the same one she used on difficult clients. "Well, obviously, I assumed you'd want to help us raise them." The words hit me like a slap, but I've always been good at keeping my expression neutral. It's a skill that served me well in client meetings when someone suggested we make the logo bigger or use more Comic Sans. "Follow your heart, Jazz," I said, taking another sip of wine. "You always do." She blinked, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "That's it? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? Congratulations on your upcoming fertility procedure and your exciting new family planning partnership with Pete." "Will, don't be like this." "Like what? Supportive?" "I'm being very supportive." I raised my glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Jasmine picked at her food while I methodically finished mine, my mind racing through the implications. She wasn't just leaving me, she was planning to humiliate me. The whole town would know that Will Grant's wife had gotten herself surgically prepared to have another man's babies while still married to him. After she went to bed, claiming a headache, I sat on our balcony with Gus and my laptop. The Gulf breeze carried the scent of salt and night-blooming jasmine, ironic given the circumstances. I pulled up our joint bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the paperwork for our condo. "What do you think, boy?" I asked Gus, scratching behind his ears. "Should we make this interesting?" He wagged his tail, which I took as encouragement. I spent the next 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Screenshots of account balances, copies of property deeds, records of Jasmine's recent spending, including several charges at Miami's most expensive hotels, on days she claimed to be showing houses in Coral Key. Then I made some calls. My lawyer first, waking him up to file emergency divorce papers, then my accountant to freeze our joint assets pending the proceedings. Finally, I called Jasmine's surgeon's office and left a message requesting that all medical bills be sent directly to her personal address, not our shared one. By the time I finished, it was 3 in the morning. Jasmine's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it in her dramatic exit to bed. The caller ID showed Pete Baby with a heart emoji. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, gorgeous, did you tell him?" "She told me," I said pleasantly. "Congratulations on the upcoming blessed event." Dead silence. "This is Pete, I assume?" "Will Grant, Jasmine's husband. You know, the one who's been paying for the condo where you've been screwing my wife? Look, man, I don't want any trouble. No trouble at all. Just wanted you to know that as of about an hour ago, Jasmine's going to need a new place to live and a new way to pay for her surgery. I've frozen all our joint accounts and filed for divorce. But hey, I'm sure a successful property developer like yourself won't have any problem supporting her." I hung up and turned off the phone. 2 hours later, Jasmine's lawyer called the house phone. Apparently, Pete had wasted no time sharing the news. The games, as they say, had officially begun. 3 days later, I was sitting in the waiting room of Gulf Coast Women's Health, watching Jasmine's friends cluster around her like designer-clad vultures. Carla Martinez, her best friend since real estate school, was holding court near the coffee machine, her voice carrying across the sterile space. "I told her this would happen," Carla was saying to Tasha Williams, another agent from Jasmine's office. "Will always seemed like the controlling type, getting a procedure to improve her fertility, and he files for divorce? That's just cruel. Men can't handle when women take charge of their own bodies," Tasha agreed, giving a pointed look in my direction. "It threatens their masculinity." I kept my eyes on my magazine, a riveting article about boat insurance, and tried not to laugh. If they only knew the real reason Jasmine was getting her tubes untied, they might be less sympathetic. But that was Jasmine's specialty, presenting herself as the victim while carefully omitting the parts of the story that might generate less sympathy. Dr. Lynn emerged from the surgical suite still in scrubs. She was a small, precise woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Grant, the procedure went perfectly. She's in recovery now." "Thank you, doctor," I said, standing up. "How long before she's fully healed?" Dr. Lynn studied me with obvious suspicion. Word traveled fast in a town like Coral Key, and I was sure she'd heard about the divorce filing. 6 to 8 weeks for complete recovery. She'll need someone to drive her home and help with daily activities for the first few days. "I'll take care of her," I said, ignoring Carla's snort of derision, and I did. For the next week, I brought Jasmine soup, helped her to the bathroom, and made sure she took her pain medication on schedule. Not because I was having second thoughts about the divorce, but because I'm not a monster. Also, it gave me a front row seat to watch her friends' increasingly creative attempts to demonize me. "He's only being nice because he feels guilty," I overheard Carla telling someone on the phone. "Mark my words, he'll use her recovery against her in court. Make it seem like she's weak or something." What they didn't know was that I was recording everything. Not their private conversations, that would be illegal, but every interaction I had with Jasmine and her friends. Florida's a 2-party consent state, but they all knew I was recording for medical purposes to track her recovery progress. The recordings were enlightening. "Pete's been so sweet," Jasmine told Tasha during one of their visits. "He sent flowers to the hospital and calls every day. He even offered to pay for a private nurse. But I told him Will would get suspicious." "You're handling this perfectly," Tasha replied. "String Will along until the divorce is final, then Pete can take care of you properly. A man like that, with his money, you'll be living like a queen." "I just wish Pete wasn't so worried about his reputation," Jasmine sighed. "He says we have to be careful until his big development deal goes through. Something about investors being old-fashioned, about personal relationships." That was interesting. I'd done some research on Pete Lomax and his development company. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Expensive website, professional headshots, impressive portfolio of projects. But when I dug deeper, using some of the investigative skills my friend Jamie had taught me, the picture got murkier. Jamie Torres was my best friend from college and a retired police detective who now ran a small private investigation business. We'd stayed close over the years, bonding over our shared appreciation for craft beer and our mutual bewilderment at our wives' shopping habits. Well, my wife's shopping habits. Jamie's wife had died of cancer 3 years ago, which had driven him into early retirement and a bottle of bourbon that he was still climbing out of. Your boy Pete's got some interesting associates, Jamie told me over lunch at Mickey's Dockside, our usual spot. Nothing criminal that I can find, but he moves around a lot. This is his third state in 5 years, and he always leaves right after a big project falls through. Meaning he might not be as successful as he pretends. Could be he's looking for someone to finance his lifestyle while he works his next angle. That would explain the expensive hotels and the reluctance to go public with their relationship. Pete wasn't protecting his reputation. He was protecting his con. The revelation came 3 months later on a rainy Thursday evening. I was in my home office, working on a logo design for a local restaurant, when I heard Jasmine's key in the front door. Except she wasn't supposed to be home. She'd told me that morning she was driving to Tampa for a real estate conference and wouldn't be back until Friday. I looked out the window and saw her stumbling up the walkway, soaked to the skin and carrying a single suitcase. Her makeup was streaked down her face, and she was moving like someone who'd been crying for hours. Gus started barking, and I opened the door before she could knock. "Jesus, Jazz, what happened?" She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "He threw me out." "Who threw you out?" "Pete." The word came out as a sob. "He said the surgery didn't work, that I'm still infertile and he doesn't want to waste any more time on me." I stared at her, processing this information. "What do you mean the surgery didn't work?" "Dr. Lynn called this morning with my test results. Something about scar tissue and complications. She said my chances of getting pregnant are actually lower now than they were before." Jasmine collapsed onto our couch, still dripping wet. "Pete said I lied to him, that I knew it might not work and I was just trying to trap him." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Jasmine had destroyed our marriage for the chance to have Pete's babies, and now she couldn't have anyone's babies. Pete had dumped her the moment she stopped being useful to him, and she was back on my doorstep looking for sympathy. I called an ambulance, not because I was ready to forgive her, but because she was shivering uncontrollably and I was pretty sure she was in shock. As the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher, she grabbed my hand. "Will, I'm so sorry. I made such a terrible mistake." I squeezed her hand gently. "I know you did, Jazz. I know. But I wasn't her savior anymore, and I sure as heck wasn't going to be her safety net." Jasmine spent 4 days in the hospital, officially for dehydration and exhaustion, but really because she'd stopped eating and sleeping. The doctors were worried about depression, and frankly, so was I. Whatever else she'd done, she didn't deserve to waste away over a scumbag like Pete Lomax. I visited her every day, bringing books and magazines, making sure she ate something. Her friends were notably absent. Apparently, being dumped by your rich boyfriend made you less interesting to the Coral Key social scene. "I feel so stupid," and she said on the third day, picking at a cup of hospital jello. "Everyone tried to warn me about him, but I thought I knew better." That was a lie, of course. No one had warned her about Pete. If anything, her friends had been encouraging the affair, probably hoping to live vicariously through her escape from boring, middle-class Will Grant. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I don't know. I can't afford the condo by myself, and my credit's shot from the spending." She couldn't quite bring herself to say hotel bills for my affair, but we both knew what she meant. "I was thinking maybe I could move back in with you, just temporarily, until I get back on my feet." "That's not going to happen, Jazz." She looked up at me with those green eyes, and for a moment I saw the girl I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, before the designer clothes and the social climbing and the casual cruelty that came with always wanting more than what you had. "I know I hurt you," she said quietly. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't have anywhere else to go. There's a women's shelter downtown. Clean beds, 3 meals a day, job placement assistance. It's not the Ritz, but it's a start." "A shelter?" She looked horrified. "Will, I can't. People would see me there. My clients, my reputation." "Your reputation is already shot, Jazz. The whole town knows you left your husband for a guy who dumped you the minute things got complicated. A few months in a shelter might actually earn you some sympathy." She started crying again, but I didn't comfort her. I'd spent 3 months watching her plan her exit strategy, listening to her friends coach her on hiding assets and playing the victim. My sympathy account was overdrawn. The next day, Martinez, Jasmine's psychiatrist, asked to speak with me privately. "Your wife is struggling with some very deep feelings of worthlessness and regret," she said. "In cases like this, having a purpose can be tremendously healing. Is there any kind of volunteer work or community service she might be interested in?" That's when I remembered the children's home. St. Catherine's was a residential facility for kids aging out of the foster system, located about 20 minutes inland from Coral Key. Jasmine and I had talked about volunteering there years ago, back when we thought we might want kids of our own. We'd even taken a tour, but somehow we'd never followed through. I mentioned it to Jasmine that evening, and for the first time in days, I saw a spark of interest in her eyes. "I remember that place," and she said, "those kids were so sweet, and they said they always needed help with homework and life skills training." "It's not glamorous work," I warned her. "These are teenagers who've been through heck. They're not going to trust you easily, and they don't care about your real estate credentials." "Maybe that's what I need," she said quietly. "Something that's not about me for once." So we drove to St. Catherine's together the day after she was discharged from the hospital. Sister Margaret, the director, remembered us from our previous visit and was delighted to have a new volunteer. She put Jasmine to work immediately, helping a 17-year-old named Marcus prepare for his GED exam. Watching Jasmine work with those kids was like seeing her become a different person. She was patient, encouraging, and genuinely invested in their success. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, just a woman trying to help kids who'd been dealt a worse hand than she had. For a moment, I almost forgot why we were getting divorced. Then Tasha Williams called. "Will, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm just so worried about Jasmine. Carla told me you've been taking her to some kind of facility. She's volunteering at a children's home." "Oh." Tasha sounded disappointed, like she'd been hoping for something more scandalous. "Well, I just wanted you to know that Pete's been asking about her. He feels terrible about how things ended, and he's wondering if maybe they could work things out." "Is that so?" "He says he was just scared about the fertility thing, but he's realized that love is more important than having biological children. He wants to take her to dinner and apologize properly." I almost laughed. Pete had probably struck out with whatever woman he'd moved on to and was looking to reactivate his backup plan. The question was whether Jasmine would be desperate enough to fall for it again. "You should probably talk to Jasmine about that yourself," I said. "I'm just the soon-to-be ex-husband. Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to discuss. Pete's concerned that you might be influencing her somehow, making her feel like she can't make her own choices about their relationship." "Influencing her how?" "Well, you are still living together, and you're driving her to this volunteer thing every day. It might look like you're trying to control her activities or isolate her from her friends." There it was, the setup. Pete was going to claim that I was manipulating Jasmine, keeping her from reconciling with him. If I pushed back too hard, it would look like Tasha was right. If I stepped aside, Jasmine would walk right back into Pete's arms. "Tell Pete he doesn't need to worry about me," I said. "Jasmine's a grown woman who can make her own decisions." "I'm so glad you feel that way," Tasha said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Because Pete's planning something very special for her. A grand gesture to show how much she means to him." After I hung up, I sat on the balcony with Gus and tried to figure out Pete's angle. He'd dumped Jasmine the moment she stopped being useful to him, but now he wanted her back? That didn't make sense unless something had changed. I called Jamie. "I need you to dig deeper into Pete Lomax," I said. "Something's not adding up." "What kind of something?" "The kind where he suddenly wants my wife back after throwing her out 3 weeks ago." Jamie was quiet for a moment. "I'll make some calls, but Will, if this guy's running some kind of long con and your wife gets caught in the middle of it," "What?" "Just be careful how much you trust her. People do desperate things when they're scared." That night, I lay awake listening to Jasmine breathe in the guest room down the hall. She'd been staying there since her release from the hospital, sleeping 12 hours a night and eating like she was making up for lost time. The work at St. Catherine's seemed to be helping her heal, but I knew that one phone call from Pete could undo all that progress. I wanted to protect her from making the same mistake twice, but I also wanted her to pay for the humiliation she'd put me through. The question was whether I could do both, or if I'd have to choose. As it turned out, the choice would be made for me. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Jasmine was at St. Catherine's and I was working on a branding project for a new seafood restaurant. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably Pete Lomax. "Will, we need to talk." "Do we? Look, I know you think I'm some kind of villain, but you don't understand the whole situation. Jasmine and I, what we have is real. I made a mistake when I got scared about the fertility thing, but I want to make it right." "What does that have to do with me?" "She won't take my calls, won't answer my texts. I think she's afraid you'll get angry if she talks to me." I almost laughed. Pete, I filed for divorce 4 months ago. What Jasmine does with her personal life is none of my business. Then you won't mind if I come by tonight to see her? It's not my house anymore, remember? The divorce decree gave it to Jasmine. You'll have to ask her. That was a lie, of course. The property settlement was still being negotiated, and we were both living there under a temporary arrangement. But Pete didn't need to know that. Great, thanks, man. I really appreciate this. He hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the day planning. If Pete was coming to win Jasmine back, he'd want to make a big impression. Flowers, jewelry, maybe a romantic dinner proposal. He'd probably park that ridiculous Mustang right in our driveway this time, since he thought he had my permission. What Pete didn't know was that I'd spent the last 4 months learning everything there was to know about him. His business practices, his personal history, his pattern of charming women, and then discarding them when they stopped being useful. Jamie's investigation had turned up 3 other women in 3 other cities, all of whom had similar stories about Pete's promises and sudden disappearances. But, more importantly, I'd been busy with my own projects. See, when you're a graphic designer with time on your hands and a serious grudge to work through, you tend to get creative. I'd spent weeks designing what I called my Pete Lomax Truth Campaign, a series of posters, flyers, and digital graphics that told the real story of Coral Key's favorite property developer. The centerpiece was a beautiful, professional-looking poster featuring Pete's headshot and the headline, "Meet Your Neighbor, Peter Lomax." Below that, in smaller text, was a detailed timeline of his romantic conquests, complete with photos of his previous victims and quotes from their testimonials about his behavior. I'd also created a QR code that linked to a website containing audio recordings of Pete's voicemails to Jasmine, the ones where he talked about keeping their relationship secret, complained about having to manage her emotions, and discussed his plans to move on to greener pastures once his business deal went through. All of it was completely legal. The photos were from public social media accounts, the testimonials were voluntary statements from women who wanted to warn others, and the audio recordings were messages Pete had left on Jasmine's phone, which she'd given me permission to access during our divorce proceedings. The plan was simple. When Pete showed up for his grand romantic gesture, he'd find that his reputation in Coral Key had taken a serious hit. I started putting up posters at 6 p.m., beginning with the community bulletin board at the marina where Pete liked to have drinks with potential investors. Then, the coffee shop where Jasmine's real estate friends gathered for their morning gossip sessions. The grocery store, the library, the entrance to our condo complex. By 7:30, I was positioned across the street from our building with a perfect view of the parking lot. Pete's Mustang pulled up right on schedule, and he climbed out wearing an expensive-looking suit and carrying a massive bouquet of roses. He made it about 10 steps before he saw the first poster. I watched him stop, stare, and then look around frantically to see if anyone was watching. Then he ripped the poster down and continued toward the building, walking faster now. He found the second poster, taped to the elevator door. This time, he didn't just stare. He pulled out his phone and started making calls, his voice getting louder and angrier with each conversation. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he was not having a good evening. When the elevator doors opened, Jasmine was inside. Even from across the street, I could see her face change as she took in Pete's appearance, the expensive suit, the roses, the poster crumpled in his free hand. They talked for maybe 30 seconds before she stepped back into the elevator and the doors closed. Pete stood there for a moment, then threw the roses into a nearby trash can and stormed back to his car. But the real show was just getting started. By the time Pete made it to Mickey's dockside, his usual evening hangout, word had already spread about the posters. A crowd had gathered around the one by the marina, and several people were using their phones to scan the QR code. When Pete walked in, the entire bar went quiet. I'd positioned myself at a corner table with a good view of the action. Pete ordered a double whiskey and tried to act casual, but I could see him checking his phone every few seconds. The audio recordings were getting shared on social media, and his phone was probably blowing up with angry messages. "Hey, Pete," called out Danny Morrison, a local boat captain who'd had dealings with Pete's company. "Is it true you told that lady from Tampa that you were going to buy her a house, and then disappeared with her down payment?" Pete's face went red. "That's a lie. Someone's trying to sabotage my business with fake information." "Sounded pretty real to me," said another voice, especially the part where you called her a useful idiot for trusting you. Pete slammed his drink down and headed for the door, but the crowd followed him outside. Someone had connected their phone to a portable speaker and was playing the audio recordings for everyone to hear. "Jasmine's so easy to manipulate," Pete's voice echoed across the marina. "I just have to tell her what she wants to hear about leaving her boring husband, and she'll do whatever I want. The best part is, she's paying for everything while she thinks I'm going to marry her." The crowd was getting ugly now. These were people who knew Jasmine, who'd watched her marriage fall apart, who'd felt sorry for her when Pete dumped her. Hearing him laugh about manipulating her was not going over well. Pete made it to his car just as someone threw a beer bottle that shattered against his windshield. He peeled out of the parking lot, leaving rubber on the asphalt, and a very satisfied crowd behind him. I finished my beer and headed home, where I found Jasmine sitting on our balcony with Gus. "That was you, wasn't it?" she said without looking up. "What was me?" "The posters, the recordings, the whole public humiliation show." I sat down in the chair next to her. "How do you feel about it?" She was quiet for a long time. Embarrassed, angry, grateful. She finally looked at me. "Mostly grateful. I was about to take him back, Will. Even after everything he did, I was going to give him another chance because I was scared of being alone. And now I know exactly what he thought of me. What he's probably been telling people about me for months." She reached over and scratched Gus behind the ears. "I deserved to hear those recordings. I needed to know who he really was." "What about us?" What about us? "Are we still getting divorced?" Jasmine smiled sadly. "Will, you just spent months planning an elaborate revenge scheme to protect me from my own stupidity. That's either the most loving thing anyone's ever done for me, or the most vindictive. Maybe it's both. Maybe it is." She stood up and headed for the door. "But either way, we can't go back to what we were. Too much has happened." She was right, of course, but as I watched her walk away, I realized that, for the first time in months, I felt like we might be able to move forward as friends. That feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on our front door. Gus was barking his head off, and I could hear Jasmine moving around in the guest room. I checked the clock, 6:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see 2 Coral Key police officers and a man in an expensive suit who looked like a lawyer. Behind them, trying to hide behind a pair of designer sunglasses, was Pete Lomax. "Will Grant?" The older officer, Sergeant Rodriguez, was someone I recognized from the local coffee shop. "We need to speak with you about a harassment complaint." I opened the door, noting that Pete stayed well back from the group. "What kind of harassment complaint?" "Mr. Lomax here says you've been stalking him and distributing false information designed to damage his reputation and business relationships." "Is that what he says?" The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Grant, I'm Thomas Whitfield, representing Mr. Lomax. We have evidence that you've been engaging in a systematic campaign of defamation against my client, including the creation and distribution of libelous materials." "Libelous materials?" "The posters you put up around town last night contain false and damaging statements about Mr. Lomax's business practices and personal relationships." I almost laughed. "Which statements are false?" "All of them," Pete said, finally finding his voice. "Those recordings are taken out of context, and those women you quoted are lying about their relationships with me." "Interesting theory. Do you have any evidence that the recordings were altered or that the women were lying?" Whitfield cleared his throat. "That's not the point, Mr. Grant. Under Florida law, you can't distribute private communications without consent from all parties involved. Actually, under Florida law, I can distribute communications that were left on my wife's voicemail with her permission, which I have in writing. I can also share information that was given to me voluntarily by women who wanted to warn others about Mr. Lomax's behavior." The younger officer was taking notes. "Sir, do you have documentation of this permission?" "Of course." I pulled out my phone and showed him the text message Jasmine had sent me 3 months ago, giving me access to her voicemail account for divorce proceedings. Everything I shared last night was either given to me with permission or is a matter of public record. Sergeant Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Lomax, do you have any evidence that the information in these posters is actually false?" It's taken out of context," Pete stammered. "Those voicemails don't tell the whole story." "What's the whole story?" I asked pleasantly. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "No, but you might have to explain yourself to the women whose down payments you took," I said. "I understand the Tampa police are very interested in talking to you about that." Pete went white. That was a misunderstanding. The deals fell through due to financing issues. Is that why you left Tampa so quickly? Financing issues? Whitfield grabbed Pete's arm. Don't say anything else. Sergeant Rodriguez looked from Pete to me and back again. Mr. Grant, while you may have been within your legal rights, we'd appreciate it if you'd avoid any further publicity campaigns. Mr. Lomax, if you have evidence of actual defamation, you'll need to pursue that through civil court, not criminal complaints. After they left, Jasmine emerged from the guest room in her bathrobe. They're trying to have you arrested? They're trying to scare me into backing down, I corrected. Pete's probably got more secrets he doesn't want exposed. Well, maybe you should let this go. You made your point last night. Did I? Because it sounds like Pete's still planning to stick around Coral Key and find his next victim. What I didn't tell Jasmine was that Jamie had called me at 5 a.m. with some very interesting information about Pete's business activities. It seemed that several of his investment opportunities were starting to look like elaborate Ponzi schemes, and the FBI was beginning to take an interest in his financial records. But Pete didn't know that yet, and I was starting to think it might be fun to watch him sweat a little more. The opportunity came that afternoon when Tasha Williams called Jasmine. "Honey, I just wanted to check on you after all that drama last night," Tasha said, her voice loud enough for me to hear from across the room. Pete is just devastated about those horrible lies someone spread about him. They weren't lies, Tasha. Oh, sweetie, you can't believe everything you hear. People get jealous when they see a successful man like Pete, and they'll say anything to tear him down. I heard the recordings myself. Pete was laughing about manipulating me. Those could have been doctored. Anyone with a computer can fake audio these days. I walked over and took the phone from Jasmine. "Hi, Tasha. Will here. Just curious. Are you planning to invest in any of Pete's development projects?" Well, as a matter of fact, he did mention a wonderful opportunity in a waterfront property that's about to... Don't. Excuse me? Don't invest with Pete. Don't give him any money, don't sign any contracts, and don't encourage your friends to do business with him. Will Grant, you have no right to interfere with other people's business decisions. You're right, I don't. But when the FBI arrests Pete for securities fraud next week, I'd hate for you to lose your life savings because nobody warned you. Silence. The FBI, ask Pete about his Tampa projects. Ask him why he left Miami so suddenly 2 years ago. Ask him why he's been living in hotels instead of buying property in all these great markets he's been investing in. I hung up and handed the phone back to Jasmine. Is the FBI really investigating him? Not yet, but they will be once someone files a complaint about his business practices. Someone like who? I smiled. Someone like the 5 women in 3 states who are about to discover they're not the only ones Pete has swindled. That evening, I sent a carefully crafted email to each of Pete's previous victims, along with contact information for the others and a suggestion that they might want to compare notes about their experiences. I also included the contact information for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, just in case anyone wanted to file a formal complaint. Then I sat back and waited for Pete's world to collapse. I didn't have to wait long. The end came on a rainy Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Pete's failed attempt to have me arrested. I was sitting in my office, working on a logo design when I heard a commotion outside. Through my window, I could see Pete's cherry red Mustang parked crookedly in our driveway, and Pete himself standing in the rain, screaming at someone on his phone. "I don't care what the FBI thinks they know," he was shouting. "Those women are lying, and I can prove it." I grabbed my phone and started recording. Pete was having a complete meltdown in full view of our entire neighborhood, and I wasn't about to miss it. "No, I can't come in for questioning today. I'm handling a personal situation." He spotted me in the window and started walking toward the building, still shouting into his phone. "I'll call you back." He hung up and started pounding on our door. Will Grant, I know you're in there." I opened the door calmly. "Good morning, Pete. You look stressed." "You son of a witch. You think you're so smart, don't you? I think I'm smart enough not to stand in the rain screaming at people. Would you like to come inside? I want you to call off your dogs. Tell those women to stop talking to the FBI, or I'll make you regret it. I'm not sure what you think I can do about that. These women are sharing their own experiences with federal investigators. That's their right as citizens. Their experiences are lies. Then you should have no problem proving that in court." Pete stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to hit me. But then Jasmine appeared in the doorway behind me. "Pete, what are you doing here?" "Jazz, baby, thank God. I need you to tell Will to stop this crazy vendetta against me. Those FBI agents came to my hotel this morning asking all kinds of questions about my business. Someone's been feeding them lies about me." "What kind of questions?" "About money I supposedly took from women, About promises I supposedly made? It's all BS, Jazz. You know me better than that. Jasmine looked at Pete, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd shown up. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and there was a desperate edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. Pete, did you take money from those women? It wasn't like that. They were investments, business partnerships. Sometimes deals fall through, that's not fraud. Did you promise to marry them? Look, sometimes you say things in the heat of the moment. That doesn't make it a legal contract. Did you promise to marry me? Pete's face went through several expressions before settling on frustrated anger. Jesus, Jazz, why are you being so dramatic? We had fun together, but you always knew it wasn't going to be forever. You're a smart woman. You had to know a guy like me wasn't going to settle down in a place like this. The words hit Jasmine like a slap. I watched her face change as the last of her illusions about Pete crumbled away. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out of here. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't ever contact me again. Jazz, come on. Get out! Pete looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation. Finally, he seemed to realize that his Coral Key con was over. Fine, but when this FBI thing blows over, don't come crawling back to me. I gave you a chance to be with a real man, and you chose to stay with this loser. He turned and stalked back to his car, but he wasn't done with his performance yet. You people in this pathetic little town deserve each other, he shouted, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. You're all just jealous because I had the balls to dream bigger than boat payments and early bird specials. He climbed into his Mustang and revved the engine, spraying gravel as he peeled out of our driveway. But instead of making a dramatic exit, he took the turn too fast and clipped Mrs. Henderson's mailbox, sending it flying into her prize-winning rose bushes. That's when the police car that had been following him turned on its lights. I watched through the window as Sergeant Rodriguez approached Pete's car. There was a brief conversation, then Pete was asked to step out of the vehicle. A few minutes later, he was in handcuffs. What's happening? Jasmine asked. I think Pete just got arrested for reckless driving and property damage, I said. But given that the FBI is looking for him, I suspect he's going to be a guest of the county jail for a while. We watched as Pete was loaded into the back of the police car, his expensive suit now completely soaked with rain. His Mustang was towed away, and Mrs. Henderson came out to inspect the damage to her mailbox and roses. I can't believe I was going to leave you for him, Jasmine said quietly. You did leave me for him. I know, and I'm sorry, Will. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Pete was gone, probably for good this time. Jasmine had finally seen him for what he really was. And I had gotten the most satisfying revenge I could have imagined without breaking a single law. What happens now? She asked. Now you go back to St. Catherine's and keep helping those kids. You're good at it, and they need you. What about us? We finish the divorce, we sell the condo and split the proceeds. We figure out how to be friends instead of married people who can't stand each other. Jasmine nodded, tears mixing with the rain on her face. I think I'd like that. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a smaller place closer to downtown Coral Key, working on a website designed for St. Catherine's Children's Home. Jasmine had become their full-time volunteer coordinator, and the kids adored her. She'd found her purpose, and more importantly, she'd found her self-respect. Pete Lomax had been convicted on multiple counts of securities fraud and was serving a 3-year sentence in federal prison. The women he'd swindled had gotten most of their money back, and several of them had sent me thank you cards for helping them connect with each other and the authorities. Jasmine and I were officially divorced, but we had dinner together once a week and actually enjoyed each other's company for the first time in years. She was dating a teacher from the children's home, a good man who appreciated her work with the kids and didn't care about her past mistakes. As for me, I'd learned something important about revenge. The best kind doesn't destroy your enemy, it reveals them. Pete had destroyed himself with his own greed and arrogance. All I'd done was make sure everyone could see who he really was. My phone buzzed with a text from Jamie. Drinks tonight? I've got a new case I want to run by you. I smiled and typed back home, sure, but no more revenge schemes. I'm retired from that business. What if I told you it involves a cheating spouse and a fake psychic? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Pick me up at 7. Some habits apparently die hard. But that's a story for another day. This one was finally over, and for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to whatever came next.